Plain and simple, Stanford was overrated. Mark Rogers TV just a few minutes after USC pulled off the last-second upset at the LA Coliseum over the Cardinal 20-17. But before we get to Stanford's situation, let's talk about the scene at the LA Coliseum following this win. The fans rushed the field. There was a vibe throughout the football game, a packed house to see USC. And the spark, the energy, the spirit that Ed Orgeron has brought this football team in particular. He's energized and ignited the fan base, the alumni, the student body. But again, most importantly, that football team is playing with passion and with confidence. They are now 5-1 under Coach O. We'll get to his situation as well. Let's talk about the Stanford Cardinal. Okay, after that huge win, maybe the biggest win at the time in college football this season over Oregon, 26-20. Stanford had the Pac-12 in its hands, fate in its hands, specifically in the North Division. Okay, they had the one loss against Utah, but they had the head-to-head against Oregon, would march on to the Pac-12 championship game against a South Division winner, USC, Arizona State, or UCLA. But that has been negated and completely canceled out by this loss. So the Pac-12 now back in the hands of Oregon in the North Division. Unless the Ducks stumble against Arizona or against Oregon State in the Civil War, the Ducks will now move on to the Pac-12 championship game against the South winner. So the Rose Bowl completely out of the hands of Stanford, and the BCS championship game. Because think about it. Stanford, like nobody else in the country, was being given the benefit of the doubt. They had one of the worst losses, let's say the worst loss on the board by a BCS contender in losing it. What is now a 1-6 Utah team? I know it was on the road. I know the Utes played well, but they physically beat down Stanford. Stanford was given a bye on that, given a mulligan of sorts, ranked 5th in the BCS because of the strength of the rest of the schedule. Now with a second loss, that completely knocks them out and should show us that Stanford's a very fine football team, but now losing to two unranked teams, both on the road. Stanford, a very good football team, probably one of the top 15 teams in the country, but they were given a benefit of the doubt like nobody else, considering that Auburn and Missouri in particular, playing in the SEC against that competition, only had one loss and were ranked behind Stanford and had better losses on the resume. Missouri losing in overtime against South Carolina, a top 10 team, and Auburn losing to LSU, who's a top 15 team. Also, Michigan State, Oklahoma State, they had better losses on their resumes with one loss. And of course, Clemson probably had the biggest gripe in being ranked behind Stanford despite the weak ACC. Clemson with a one loss against maybe the best football team in the country in Florida State. So the benefit of the doubt out the window. Now losses to two unranked teams will send Stanford plummeting. I would hope they should go way back in the standings in the BCS after losing to two unranked teams. Okay, that's the Stanford situation. Still a fine football team. Will probably place third in the bowl slotting for the Pac-12. Now let's look at the USC situation, because this football team has gotten pushed around on both sides of the football in recent years, specifically by Stanford in losing 4 consecutive games to the Cardinal, but by just about any decent football team, because of the scholarship reductions, and certainly because they played very uninspired football down the stretch under Lane Kiffin last season. That Georgia Tech loss in the Sun Bowl was an embarrassment in losing to an undermanned Georgia Tech team, but the scholarship reductions, a thin roster, injuries, and chaos ensuing on this football team in the locker room, and you had uninspired play until Coach O took over, and we saw it come to fruition in this game. Physical play. They went toe-to-toe with Stanford at both lines of the scrimmage, and they played well. They dedicated themselves to a balanced attack on offense, and we didn't see the numbers in the rushing game. They couldn't move the Stanford offensive front consistently in the running game. Buck Allen's a really good back, but he carried it 16 times for 26 yards, and Trey Madden 6 carries for 11 yards. So kind of sounds like I'm contradicting myself. The point I'm making is that they stuck with the ground game. They dedicated themselves to running a balanced offense and keeping some pressure off of Cody Kessler. And despite the lack of success in the running game, they stayed with it. It created balance, and it paid off in the passing game. Kessler hit on 25 of 37 passes, 288 yards in the touchdown pass, and most importantly, no interceptions from Cody Kessler. He's a much different quarterback than he's been in the past under Lane Kiffin, and he's crediting Coach Orgeron for his success as well in recent weeks. Again, the Trojans at 5-1 under Coach O. Nelson Agholar, 8 catches for 104 yards. This wide receiver core at USC, check out the video post that we ran just a couple days before the season started. This wide receiver core, despite Marquise, who at the time was considered no doubt the best wide receiver in college football, this receiver core was depleted like none other at that level because of scholarship reductions and injuries. They were looking for a number 3 receiver all over the place. It's most likely Darius Rogers, who just caught 1 pass tonight. But Nelson Agholar, with the injury issues with Marquise, who still chipped in with 6 catches for 83 yards in this game, but he's clearly not the player that he was last year. I don't think it's a decline. I just think it's injuries. He'll be fine, and he'll be a fine pro player as well. But Nelson Agholar has saved this passing game and given Cody Kessler a downfield threat. The defense didn't stop the run. Tyler Gaffney still had an outstanding performance for Stanford once again, and averaging over 6 yards per carry for about 160 yards. But the defense contained the run. They didn't get mauled up front like Oregon did. They had the pass rush all night on Kevin Hogan, forced him into 11 completions, only 14 pass completions for the Stanford offense, so just 14 of 25. So he was hurried all night. The pass rush was in his face. He was running for his life, and he made 2 critical mistakes in the fourth quarter in throwing interceptions to Deion Bailey and to Sua Cravens, and that ultimately kept the Stanford offense off the field, even though USC did not turn those interceptions. Well, they turned the second one into the game-winning field goal. The first one they squandered away, but kept Stanford from scoring as they picked it off in their own territory. So once again, let's get past the football and just the energy that Ed Orgeron has brought to this football program. We saw it after the game. We saw it throughout the game. We've seen it now for 6 football games. USC is a different football team. They're not a great football team. They're too thin in special teams. They're too thin in both the offensive and defensive lines to be a true force in the top 10 or top 15, but they're a very fine football team. They still have recruited well under Lane Kiffin, and their first-line players are about as good as anybody in the top 10, not saying Florida State, not saying Alabama, but once you get past that first level of those teams, plus Ohio State and some others, USC can play on that front line with just about anyone. Again, depth is an issue. Ed Orgeron has made this a very difficult decision for USC Athletic Director Pat Hayden, who's going to be looking for a big name. But Ed Orgeron, if he can complete the deal, and I don't mean not lose another football game, but if he maintains this kind of confidence, this kind of performance out of this football team for the remainder of this season, he may have himself a job. Heard some comments from him before the game on radio. He is certainly talking like he is going to be the next full-time football coach at USC. He says, I'm taking my family. We're going to move them from Louisiana to Los Angeles. We've got plans for my kids to go to school there. I want to be the USC head coach. Trojan fans, what do you think about Coach O? Do you want him permanently at USC? I would give the guy a short contract. Enough not to worry recruits, not a 1-year contract, but probably a 2, most likely a 3-year contract. So it creates some stability, but at the same time, you're not tying yourself to an unproven commodity. So 3 years for Coach O at USC would be my recommendation. Now I'd like to hear from you right here on Mark Rogers TV.